So good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Powers. I'm the Executive Director of the Peekskill Business Improvement District. Welcome to our historic panel discussion, The Freedom Movement, Celebrating and Preserving Our African American History. We will be introducing and hearing from our panelists in just a few moments, but first, a few welcoming remarks. Please welcome the Deputy Mayor for the City of Peekskill, Patricia Riley.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you to our panel for being here. This is such an important day. To have events like this in Peekskill are just absolutely wonderful. But before I start saying just a few words, I want to just say, on behalf of Mayor Vivian McKenzie, she is at her nephew's graduation upstate New York. She couldn't be here, it's graduation weekend. And the entire City Council, we welcome you to the City of Peekskill. And I'm going to put my glasses on because I want to say a few words. And we have our city manager, Matt Alexander, who will say a few words in just a minute. He's here today too. So I just want to thank people that are here today for this wonderful, wonderful event and how important it is, the Freedom Movement, preserving, celebrating African American history in our city. How important it is to remember and to learn and to keep learning about our history. I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, and in this day and age, people are trying to silence history and silence anything that's not comfortable for people. Well, you know what? History isn't comfortable. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we learn from it all. And we need to remember, and we need to support our schools in every community so we can keep our history alive, no matter what the history is, because history is something to learn from. And if we don't learn it, we're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. But today we're honoring and learning about our African American history in Peekskill. And growing up in Peekskill, I was born and raised here, I live here, I'm the deputy mayor here, I even taught a few years in Peekskill. And I love my hometown. But what was wonderful about growing up here, it was the diversity. And I was very lucky, and as an adult today, I say thank you, Lord, that my parents from Italy moved here, and we had the diversity growing up. It meant so much. We played together, we learned together, we shopped together, and we worshiped together. And that's a diverse community. Today, we have a lot of new families moving into our beautiful city of Peekskill. And when I ask them what brought them here, the word diversity comes up again. That this is a city of diversity. We've always been, and we will always remain that way. That brings us our beauty and our strength. And I am so happy to be part of Peekskill every day of my life. But I just want to say a few things. I want to thank people that have come here today. We have Kevin Douglas Green that flew in from Tennessee. Thank you for being here. Ernestine Martin, is it Wyatt? That came from Washington, D.C. And all our panelists here that traveled near and far to be members of our wonderful panel today. And Mr. Sales, for being commentator today. Did I get your name correct? Okay, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the Sisters in Support, Sister Fern and her family, and all the Sisters of Support, and the Peekskill Bid for being members here and also members with the City of Peekskill. We always love events that Sisters in Support puts on for us, whether it's wonderful dances for Kwanzaa and everything else through our city. So we thank you. You're very important in our wonderful city. So without further ado, I want to bring up City Manager Matt Alexander. And please, everybody, enjoy this wonderful, wonderful event that we have today in our beautiful Central Firehouse. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Matt Alexander, the City Manager for Peekskill, and I just want to quickly add to what the Deputy Mayor said. A big thank you to the Business Improvement District and the Sisters for helping put this together. And it's especially my honor to be here in front of the descendants of in this forum. And I say this as somebody who just got back from where I'm originally from. Many years ago, I've been in New York now for 45 years, but I come from as a refugee out of the state of Alabama, and I just went back to Alabama for a funeral, and I have to say there's a change. There's a huge change happening. You know, now I go to places like Montgomery, Mobile, and other places, and they're teaching a history there that did not exist when I was a child there, and there's been a huge gap that's been left out of our history books, and I am proud to be here to get to hear this presentation and to be a part of this through you and your participation and all of the hard work that you have done to put this together. Okay, so the Deputy Mayor is letting me know that we have some commendations from the Mayor, and this is the time that we're going to do this.
Yes. Okay. So we're just going to go around. I just want to read the names. Okay, and I'll read it once because it's the same thing, and it's signed by our Mayor Vivian C. McKenzie. So Certificate of Commendation, City of Peekskill, awarded to Gerald Brown, Holly and Harriet Green descendant, preserving and celebrating African American history. The City of Peekskill commends you on your hard work and accomplishments. Vivian C. McKenzie, Mayor of the City of Peekskill, May 11, 2024. And awarded to Wilhelmina Green Brown, Holly and Harriet Green descendants. The next one is awarded to Kevin Douglas Green, Frederick Douglas descendant. The next one is awarded to Ernestine Martin Wyatt, Harriet Tubman descendants. The next is awarded to Ellie Mosier, John Jacobs Rifle Jack Peterson descendants. And the next one is awarded to James Taylor, John Jacob Rifle Jack Peterson descendants. And the last one, but not least, is awarded to Professor William Sales Jr., the moderator for today's event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. While they're being distributed, excuse me, as everybody pointed out, the Business Improvement District is the primary sponsor for today. And we have a board member who has created an illustration of Harriet Tubman and the statue. And these will be available for sale at the Fern Tree starting this afternoon. And the artist is actually here, David Abrevaya. Where are you, David? Oh, he's in the back. Well done, David. We also have some other items that'll be for sale at the Fern Tree. We have t-shirts. And these are provided, by the way, by the sculptor. We also have magnets, and we have some really beautiful holiday ornaments. So they will be available at the Fern Tree for sale. So thank you for that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the President of the Board of Directors of the Peekskill Business Improvement District, Richard Rogers. Come on up, Richard.
Thank you all for being here. It's a wonderful day and wonderful time to have this event. So, I haven't been a resident of Peekskill for my entire life, but there's always been a connection with Peekskill in my family. My great-grandmother owned a farm in Peekskill during the Depression, and people would come to the back door and knock on her door and ask for a day's work. And she would give them work, and then she would feed them at her kitchen table. So we have a sign online that says Peekskill is a friendly town. It's been a friendly town for a long time. And as a child, my mother would take me to the Peekskill Dude Ranch. No longer here, but has some great memories. So there's always been a connection with Peekskill. I moved here primarily from Brooklyn, primarily because of the diversity of this great town. So I want to thank you all again for attending this historic event. Some of you have traveled a great distance to be here, others just a few blocks. But no matter what the distance, we are all here to honor the freedom movement and to hear from the descendants of those who played such a vital role in that movement. I am honored that the descendants of Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Harriet and Hawley Green, and John Jacob Peterson are with us today. This event has been in the works long before I became president of the board. I want to thank all of those who worked so diligently on the Peekskill board to bring the Harriet Tubman Beacon of Hope Monument to Peekskill, and for encouraging today's panel discussion. Among those, our executive director of the Peekskill bid, Bill Powers, who you've already met, Peekskill City Councilman Brian Fassett, who cannot join us today, former board president Cynthia Del Rosario, who does not look like she's here today, but had a lot of input into this event, presenting it, and Laverne Furches, Joseph from Sisters in Support. Thank you so much for everything that you did to organize this event. Also present today from the Peekskill bid are Dorothy Posada and David Abravaya, whose poster you just saw. And I have every wish that this poster will go viral. I know it will go viral, and it'll change the world, this poster. I really believe it. I also want to thank the city of Peekskill for partnering with us to bring this very special and historic event to our city. Peekskill has a long and rich African-American history dating back to the 18th century, to more recent times when Peekskill became the first city in New York State to elect an African-American mayor in 1984. I am looking forward to hearing your family stories and conversation and contributions. Welcome. We are honored to have you here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to turn the program over. Actually, I see Colin Smith is here. Colin, do you want to come on up? Our County Legislator Colin Smith snuck in behind me. I didn't see him sneak in, so let Colin do his welcome and greet everyone as well.
Thank you, Bill. And good morning, everyone. It's an honor. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here to participate in this occasion, this event. I know some of the honorees. I do not know all of them, but I am, like I said, I'm honored to be here in your presence today. And we have somebody who traveled all the way from, was it Tennessee? All right, well, welcome. And so I will be brief because we want to get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation. What I do have here are certificates of recognition from the certificates of appreciation, from the Westchester County Board of Legislators. And as Mr. Powers stated, I am County Legislator Colin Smith. I represent District 1, which includes Peekskill. And so in no particular order, I have a certificate of appreciation on behalf of the Westchester County Board of Legislators in recognition, as you're honored by Sisters in Support Incorporated at this Freedom Movement panel. Your support in preserving and celebrating African American history is greatly appreciated and acknowledged. And this certificate is presented to Gerald Brown. And I'm not going to read the same thing, but each of the certificates acknowledge all of you in the same manner. This is a certificate of appreciation for Mr. Kevin Douglas Green. Thank you. We have our certificate of appreciation for Dr. William Sales, Jr. Thank you. And thank you for being here to moderate today. Certificate of appreciation for Mr. James Taylor. Thank you. We also have a certificate of appreciation for Miss Ellie Mosier. Certificate of appreciation for Miss Ernestine Martin Wyatt. Okay. And last but certainly not least, certificate of appreciation for Miss Wilhelmina Green Brown. Thanks again, everyone.
Before I turn the microphone over to Sandra, I just want to also welcome Councilman Rob Scott is here. And also the Executive Director of the Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, Carol Voicing. So welcome. Sandra, I'm going to turn this over to you so that they can listen to somebody with a beautiful voice instead of a crackly voice.
Thank you so much. Let me check and see if I get all my steps in. I think I got half of them done. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's so nice to see you all here. My name is Sandra Livingston, Vice President of Operations at Sisters in Support, Inc. We are so happy to collaborate with the city of Peekskill. You know what I was getting ready to say? I was getting ready to say the city of Louisville. That's where I'm from. Whew, I digress. The city of Peekskill. Thank you so much for all of your support and your generous donations. And absolutely, we thank Bill Powers of the Peekskill BID, which is the Business Improvement District of Peekskill. This would not be possible without them. So thank you sincerely. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm not going to go back over all of their travel and all of that because we've covered that. But thank you guys, thank you guests, and thank you Dr. Sales for agreeing to do this for us. He's always so eager to help Sisters in Support, so we just cherish him and we deeply appreciate him. And speaking of Sisters in Support, this organization was founded in 1997 by Sister Fern and her mother and Mr. Jordan, and has grown over the years to just kind of continue to thrive. The main thing that they focused on was the Underground Railroad tours, which we found out that Harriet Tubman passed through this area. So they decided to make sure to research and honor that whole legacy from Harriet Tubman. So we actually give out the Underground Railroad tours. Usually we do them in the summertime months because it also involves a little bit of physical activity. There are caves and tunnels, and there's just a wonderful tour to take. So hopefully if you haven't taken the tour, you will be able to take it at some point. So we do the tours. We also, as an organization, try to do scholarships for high school students. So when we have fundraisers, those funds that you do provide by buying tickets to our events, they help us to be able to help support a student going to college. So thank you very much for your support over the years. We have also had in the past, we've had things such as the Heritage Festival at the Riverfront. We've had musical events at Paramount. We've had book signings and just, poetry readings, things that we do to help the community. And we have our annual Kwanzaa event, which is a culmination at the end of the year on a high note. So definitely that's an event that you should not miss, because I tell you, we try our best to just bring it for you. Anyway, that's enough about our organization, but we do have several members here, so I would like for our members of Sisters in Support, if you're here, to stand up. I see Debbie Franklin. Sister Fern is our president. And we have Alvina Smith. She's not in the room, but she's in the building. So thank you, sisters, for helping to pull this together. Without further ado, I would like to turn this over to Dr. Sales. I want to give you a little bit, tiny bit of background on him. He's so modest, he won't tell you. He'll say, oh, just give him my name, that's enough. But let me pull it up because we do appreciate the fact that he took the time to come in here. And I'm having trouble with connection issues in here today, actually, so. Well, you know what? Let me just do it by freehand. Dr. Sales, he is a retired professor of African Studies at Seton Hall University. He graduated from Columbia University with a doctorate degree. He's done various events and speakings and presentations. He's written 2 books. And I can't give you exactly the name of them, but definitely, if you Google Dr. William W. Sales Jr., you will find out a lot of information about him. So without further ado, I would like to please turn the moderation over to Dr. William Sales.
Good morning. I'm so happy to see you all here. And it's my privilege to moderate this panel, which combines the national and internationally significant actors in a very important point in the history of our people during the struggle for emancipation, and our local notables from that same period, who in their own way contributed to that struggle. And in preparation for this program, I looked into my own background from this period. I found out that I'm a descendant of 2 Civil War veterans, right, who were members of the U.S. Colored Troops of the Grand Army of the Republic. Right? I also found out my earliest relative I could identify was here in 1748, excuse me, 1748. Also, as a little introduction, do a little additive in here, as I was sitting here thinking, during the Civil War, 1 in every 5 Americans was an African American. 187,000 of them served in the Union Army. 1 in every 5 sailors in the Union Navy was an African American, not an insignificant number of whom were black women. 87,000 of those people gave their lives in the struggle. So if anybody has a right to claim American citizenship, it's the sable sons and daughters of the African Americans. Our theme today, of course, is the freedom movement, preserving and celebrating African American history. Today we focus on preserving and celebrating African American history in the freedom movement, and I start with a little citation of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, our most preeminent sociologist and historian. He once remarked that the history of the United States, in large part, consisted of the position and treatment of black people and the response thereto. An accurate historical record of our experience as a people should be a legacy of truth that can help us today to advance our struggle for freedom. Du Bois made 3 indictments of the historians of his period. He said that where possible, they destroyed the record of black achievement, and where they couldn't destroy it, they ignored it. And where they couldn't ignore it, they distorted it. A rich history of white opposition to racism has also been largely ignored. This has facilitated the presentation of attitudes of white supremacy as monolithic and hegemonic, when this is far from true. The abolitionist movement and the Underground Railroad reflect the fact that the reality of white supremacy, even during slavery, was far from hegemonic and unchallenged. That is, as a historical narrative in the United States, which is fundamentally false, because it suggests a sharp dichotomy between white people who oppose black liberation and black people's struggle for liberation. And what I'm saying is that there were always black and white people who struggled for black liberation. And that's why this panel is so important today, because when you talk about the freedom movement and the Underground Railroad, you're talking about a coalition between black and white abolitionists. Started as early as the 17th century and continued through the mid-19th century in the United States. Enslaved African Americans were resisting their bondage and struggling to gain their freedom through self-emancipation. The individuals who sought this freedom from enslavement were assisted by black and white people, all right, who united together to become known as the Underground Railroad. Despite the successes of the Underground Railroad, and the Civil War defeat of the Confederacy, Jim Crow discrimination would continue to dominate race relations for 100 years after emancipation. It is now 2024, and there's still many of us alive who know what a segregated water fountain is all about, who know what the back of the bus is all about, who know what police violence is all about. Right? In the African American social movements of the 50s and 60s of the last century, Black people more commonly referred to this struggle as the Black freedom struggle rather than the civil rights movement. The fight for civil rights, of course, was one important aspect of the Black struggle, but African Americans were struggling for something more than the fundamental rights guaranteed by the US Constitution and American legislation. The struggle of Black people for freedom was rooted in the notion of human rights. Human rights antedate the US Constitution and are rooted in the notion that every person has the right to the freest development of their potential as human beings. That potential cannot and should not be constrained by constitutions and laws. While civil rights can be given or taken away by legislation and constitutional amendments, human rights are inalienable. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in his 1969 essay titled A Testament of Hope, and I quote him briefly, he said, "The Black Revolution is much more than a struggle for the rights of Negroes. It is forcing America to relate to its interrelated flaws of racism, poverty, militarism, and materialism. It is exposing evils that are rooted deeply in the whole structure of our society. It reveals systemic rather than superficial flaws and suggests that radical reconstruction of society itself is the real issue to be faced." Of course, when he began to get these insights, he didn't live too long. This afternoon, our panelists, all descendants of leading abolitionists who participated in the Underground Railroad, will share with us the legacy of their illustrious forebears and what they and their families are doing to keep that legacy alive. I'd like our panelists, as I introduce them, to present in the following order, if it's okay with them. First, we'd like to hear from Ernestine Martin Wyatt, a direct descendant of Harriet Tubman. Secondly, I'd like her presentation to be followed by Douglas Green, Kevin Douglas Green, from the family of Frederick Douglass. Gerald Brown and Wilhelmina Green Brown were descendants of the preeminent Peekskill abolitionist family and Civil War veteran, the Hawley and Greens, and Ellie Moshe and James Taylor, who are descendants of John Jacob Riflejack Peterson. And I have to say that I had not heard of Riflejack. I really don't. Who's Riflejack? All right? Okay. I will ask each presentator to zero in on the salience of their particular ancestor and what is important about that ancestor's legacy, what must of that legacy be preserved, what are specific activities the family has engaged in to preserve that legacy, and how can we participate with you in the preservation of that legacy. I'd like each person to take about 10 minutes, and we know what that's about. Well, you know, without further ado, again, I'd like to thank you all for being here, and Peekskill is truly a special place. I'm not a Peekskillian. I've only been here 32 years, you know, but the interesting thing is I came, but I didn't leave, right? And it's been a very, very important place where some of my younger children have been able to get a very good education, where today, as we speak, my oldest grandchild is graduating summa cum laude from Howard University with a 4.0 in biology and a membership in Phi Beta Kappa. And then my oldest male grandson later on will be inducted into the Simons STEM program at Stony Brook University, where he will begin his sojourn this September, majoring in civil engineering. Both of them graduated from Peekskill Public School. Okay, Ms. White?
Well, thank you. Thank you to the Peekskill Business Improvement District and also to Sisters in Support for inviting me to be here today to share the history and the legacy of my ancestor, Harriet Ross Tubman. I hope you don't mind. He said 10 minutes. I usually, they usually tell me 3 minutes, but I always write down what I'm going to say because I can go over 10 minutes. I can go a half an hour or even more because I love talking about Aunt Harriet. And she's done so much. It's hard to focus what she's done because she's done so much in her life. Her story is large. So, but I'll start, and maybe I think I can answer all the things that you said that you wanted me to identify. Today we're here and we're celebrating all of these descendants and their ancestors, but we are also looking at the statue of Aunt Harriet, the beacon of light, and that symbolizes a woman whose life has illuminated and inspired for many generations before and to come. It is one thing I want to make clear is that you see the beacon of light and you see many other statues where she's holding out a lantern, but she would not have carried a lantern during the time that she was actually seeking freedom, because that would call attention to what she was doing. You don't, she chose the different times when she came and was trying to liberate others on a Saturday or weekend because of timing, of when the paper was closed or whatever, so you couldn't get word out until later. The light is used mostly for metaphor, and oftentimes African American people are a forgotten people, and our contributions going unrecognized. More than that, we are marginalized. And now at this time in our history, as you said, Dr. Sells, our history is being threatened to either being rewritten or altogether removed from the history books. But the thing is that African American history is American history, and you can't write us out. We're a large part of what makes this country what it is. Our children cannot be, I would say other cultures' children need to have the books and history taught. Our children also need to be taught, but it's a little bit different. The time that I was coming up, which was in the 60s and the 70s, we had, you were taught your history by your families, your parents, and if you didn't get it there, you got it from your church. But during the late 60s, early 70s, the Black Power movement, and there were a plethora of African American cultural centers that popped up all over America. And so there, you not only got your African American history, but you also got your African history. So you see Dr. Sales with his dashiki on, and Sister Fern with her clothing on. I mean, that is when we really started to wear those things with pride. But for the non-African American persons, it's important that they also know that history, because you can't remain ignorant. It's not about trying to place guilt on anyone, but you need to know where we're coming from and what we've gone through in order to be able to continue to move forward. And it is places like this where we're sharing that history and continue to promote her legacy that is really important, because that's where you're going to find it. You're not necessarily going to find it in the book or even rely on that. It has to be in venues like this or other places. But I will say again what was said already. My name is Ernestine Tina Martin Wyatt, and I am 3 times great-grandniece, one of them, of Harriet Ross Tubman. Now, Aunt Harriet didn't have any children of her own. She did adopt a child when she was late in life, and when she married United States Colored Troop from the 8th Regiment. His name was Nelson Davis, and actually it was Charles Nelson Davis. And they adopted a child named Gertie, but no one knew whatever happened to Gertie. And she wasn't in the will that Aunt Harriet made. So we don't know what happened to her, but I will tell you that all of us that go out and speak and do different things, we are descendants of her siblings. Her siblings, the one that I'm descended from, I'm one of her older sisters, and her name is Soph. Soph was the last of the older sisters to be sold away, and when she was sold away, she had just had an infant child, and her name was Anne Marie, and Anne Marie was still nursing, and but Anne Marie was left with the grandparents, and when Aunt Harriet liberated herself and took us up north, changed our names to Stewart, Anne Marie's name also was changed, and she was called Anne Marie Ross Stewart. I will tell you that Aunt Harriet was a freedom fighter. She sowed seeds of faith, and I'm saying faith first, freedom and family, that began with the education she obtained while working alongside her father on the plantation. And that's important, and you'll see why that's important later when I talk about her Civil War service. He taught her how to read the landscape and the environment. Her mother taught her about herbs and roots, all of which she used while the conductor on the Underground Railroad during her service in the Civil War and later as an activist. She was a powerful, selfless woman, gaining her strength and endurance from her dependence on God, relying on His guidance. And she, if you read her book, the first one that was dictated by Sarah Bradford, Aunt Harriet always gives glory to God for what she was able to do. She always relied on Him, and she had a great relationship with Him. But despite seizures sustained by a hit in the head that would cause her to drop off to sleep for a period of time, she remained in her belief that God would take care of her, and fiercely and confidently went into battle against slavery, or the snake. Slavery, and you'll hear about that. Slavery was the snake, and oppression wherever and whenever she met it. She understood herself well and knew how to use her abilities although reading and writing was not among them. She used the power within her to help others. She used others' underestimation of her to her advantage, and people always underestimated her. They would just look at her and underestimate her. The night she was to leave, she was out singing a song to leave a message about going away, and passing her was the owner of the plantation on his horse. Aunt Harriet continued to sing loudly as she was passing. And she was talking about, see, I'm getting ready to leave. But I guess he didn't take her seriously. Aunt Harriet continued to sing loudly as he was passing. He looked at her once, then again, and as she kept singing, never believing, she was letting him know that she was bound for freedom. She also knew others thought her not to be intelligent by the looks of her, but in one account, an unknown man said to look her directly in her eyes, you saw she was sharp. He said afar, looking at her from afar, she looked slow-witted. But when he got right up on top of her and looked at her eyes, they said something different. She had the ability to disguise herself and hide in plain sight, as she often had to do in the belly of the enemy in South Carolina. While in enslavement, she was always thinking and did nothing without a plan. She was a great strategist and analyzer, which she continued to build upon for the rest of her life. Once she realized her faith in God empowered her, she did not let her circumstances deter her. There was always another way. And in 1862, her work as an abolitionist, because she self-liberated in 1849, 1850 was the Fugitive Slaves Act. So she, instead of going forward north, she didn't stay there long. She went to Canada because of that law. But she was an abolitionist, and which he knew. Which also let me go back. I got off track. Her work as an abolitionist placed her in a circle of other known abolitionists up in New England, and a conductor, and that she was never lost a passenger, as she says all the time. Governor John Andrews of Massachusetts was one such person. He knew from her reputation she would be a valuable asset to the Union Army winning the war. He recruited her to go down into Beaufort, South Carolina, a landscape similar where she was born to work as a spy and scout, when not doing that, to do whatever else was needed. So if you go back to what I said in the beginning about that landscape, the landscape in Dorchester County, which is pretty much unchanged from when she was there. But in 50 years, it's a threat of the marsh reclaiming the land. So if you want to go down there and see that area, you better do it soon. But the thing is, that marshland was in the waterways, very similar to the marsh and the waterways in Beaufort, South Carolina. So she was very familiar with that. She was given every benefit of a commissioned officer, the right to use government transport, and the commissary. Of course, she also used her knowledge of healing, nursing, pharmaceuticals, and marketing for the benefit of the soldiers and the freed while there. She knew the only way to win the war was to free the enslaved and allow them to fight. She was a captain over a gang of scouts, as Frederick Douglass' son said to his wife in a letter. I think it was Amelia, that he sent a letter and said, you know who I saw yesterday? I saw Harriet. She was a captain over a gang of scouts. And so that was documentation. Yes, I saw her. This is what she was doing. But there are some people who say, oh, she wasn't a spy and a scout. But I mean, if you are spying, you don't want people to know what you're doing. So that's kind of, yeah, right. So it was through this gathered intelligence and analysis, the plan was set into motion, and under the leadership of Colonel James Montgomery, She became the first woman to lead between 150 to 300 United States colored troops in a military raid June 2nd, 1863, up the Combahee River in South Carolina, destroying targeted areas and mines on the river, burning buildings, crops, and stockpiles of munition and food, which destroyed the capital, freeing over 700 enslaved. So they had no more workforce to be able to do anything. After the Civil War, she continued in her fight for justice and equality, working with the Freedmen's Bureau and empowering women. Close to 80 years old, she found a way to purchase a place for the elderly and infirmed on a combined pension of only $20 per month. Harriet Ross Tubman is a woman which left a legacy of faith, freedom, family, determination, justice, equality, and a never give up or surrender attitude. In her own words, she communed throughout the day with God. Although she had a choice, she listened and depended totally on God, owing her success to Him. She was selfless and full of humility. Some of the seeds she planted in her life are now being harvested in the 21st century through symbolism by the following honors. In June 2021, she was inducted into the U.S. Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame and became a recipient of the Knowlton Award and Medal. In 2022, there was a statue dedicating ceremony on the CIA campus. Through the words of CIA Director Burns, William Burns, he said, "We are not honoring Tubman simply because of the ops she ran or the intel she collected. We're honoring her for the example she set. It's an example of courage, of conviction, of service and sacrifice and selflessness, of all the things we hope to live up to every day as CIA." In September 2023, a ship naming ceremony was conducted. In 2024, a fuel and cargo supplier ship for the U.S. Navy called the Oiler will start to be built with her name to honor it. But that's going to happen in 2025. I just found out at a luncheon. January 2024, heritage coins with the stages of her life engraved upon them was rolled out. Now there's 3 coins, a gold and 2 silver, so those can still be purchased. In March 2024, her name and image was placed on the Underground Railroad stamp series that will go around the world, taking our history everywhere. Did you know the snake in Aunt Harriet's quote was never killed? It was only maimed, allowed to hibernate and restore itself, growing and giving birth to more snakes to bite us over and over again. This is seen in the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, and ratified in December 18, 1865. Yet slavery was only abolished partially due to the exceptions clause. A lot of us have read the 13th Amendment, but read right over that exceptions clause. That continues to allow slavery under another name as a punishment for crime. Today we are seeking for an abolition amendment, a joint resolution to establish a new federal amendment that would repeal exceptions to the slavery clause of the 13th Amendment. Without this, there is no justice and no equality for anyone. And the importance of this is anything that's on the books, they can go back to. You see it happening already. Going back to what, the 1844, 1874 law, and now there's another law that they're talking about. And then you look at us as African Americans, we have to renew our voting rights. I don't understand, why are we the only people that have to, in this country, that have to renew our voting rights? It doesn't make sense. I can describe Aunt Harriet in so many ways, and it wouldn't be enough time to do that. But I believe she would most want to be remembered as a woman of God, obedience, faith, and mostly love. This is what saw her through her journey. In today's climate, there's not a lot of love being shown. Aunt Harriet learned earlier in her life that hate destroys. Instead of hating people, she hated the circumstance and sought to change it. Let it inspire you to stand against the negative, to change it into the positive. Her first action of love was to take herself out of the center and ascertain and meet the basic needs of others. If you look at her property, you'll see what she did when she had no money. But she has the White House that was used for people who had no home and the indigent. She had the brick house, which was where the family was brought to, and that's where my great-grandmother was born. And then she has the barn, and then she had the other building for the infirmed. Love never tears down. It inspires and encourages, uplifting in nature and leaving a memory with others whose life you touched, that they were glad they knew you. Love yourself as God loves you. There are many things to be made right, and we have to be ever vigilant as we move forward. And there are many ways to achieve that, especially our right to vote. When we don't vote, and we have to make that clear, when we don't vote, we are still voting, rather, we are throwing away our vote. Because if we don't vote for one, it's certainly going for another. So we should honor those whose shoulders we stand on, learn from them by remembering what they did and how they were able to overcome. It informs us about our future and the direction we should take. It reminds us and confirms the strength and pride we have as a people going forward. Thank you.
And without further ado, Brother Kevin Green, descendant of Frederick Douglass.
I don't sit and talk very well. I don't sit and talk very well. Real quick, I would like to do something before my time starts. Anyone in the room that can be confirmed by their identification, driver's license, under the age of 25, if you would come forward real quickly, please. Under the age of 25, please come forward quickly. Young lady, come on. I see you trying to hide. Under the age of 25, come forward. Because you never know when you participate, what you're able to achieve. Here you go. Here you go. Based on, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing these young people. Thank you very much. These are the most important people in the room today. From my perspective, no disrespect to the elders and to our representatives. So thank you. So I'm Kevin Douglas Green, great-great-grandson of Frederick and Anna Murray Douglass. I know it doesn't have Anna's name on here, but she's just as important as Frederick in the story of his life. So I present from the perspective of a descendant. I am not a historian on Frederick Douglass. I present on how I feel with my pride and my knowledge of the Douglass family. So not to belittle anyone, and as I do talk about Frederick Douglass, and as same as Harriet Tubman and the other distinguished descendants of important African American people in this country, there's just not enough time to tell the whole story of the accomplishments of these important people. So Frederick Douglass, I throw the challenge coin out there so anyone in the military know what a challenge coin is. I throw the challenge coin out there that you, if you have not, read Frederick Douglass's autobiographies. any one of the three, but start with the narrative. And that's where you learn about Frederick Douglass. It takes time to learn about Frederick Douglass. You're not going to learn it all from here from me today. But from a descendant perspective, just a quick little snippet about myself. I was born in Paris, France. I'm an Army brat. My father was in the United States Army. I'm retired Army myself. I was raised in Seaside, California. I was raised in a very, very diverse community, and I was also raised as Kevin Green. And when I say that is I was able to grow up as myself, the way my mother and father and everyone around me was raised. I did not have to grow up as a Douglass. And the reason why I say that is because my mother was raised as a Douglass in Washington, D.C., and there was a distinct privilege, honor, legacy, and heavy load growing up as a Douglass. And so I appreciate my mother letting me grow up as Kevin Green until I knew how to be a Douglass. So that was very important to me. So Frederick Douglass was born, he was born an enslaved African American. And when I say African American, one, we know he was a black man, but based on the fact that his father was most likely white, automatically gives him the stamp of being American, don't you think? So that moniker is, because other than that, I would have just say he was born an enslaved African. So that just gives him that dual privilege. Because there's a privilege to be an African, and there's a privilege to be an American. So he's born in Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, just county away. And all those different connections, I grew up, when we learned that the different connections and families of Wayans and Greens and all the different people in that community are all related in one way or another. But Douglass being born there and raised and being raised by his grandmother and having, just this his grandmother pretty much predicted what his life would end up being. She knew he was not going to be enslaved his whole life. And when he got that opportunity, because there's a whole lot I'm skipping for those who know his story, when he got that opportunity to become a free man, it's based on two basic things. One, he had help. Another is the foundation of what he was able to do to prepare himself to escape from slavery. And that foundation, anyone throw the word out what that foundation for Frederick Douglass might have been for him escaping slavery. Quickly, anyone. Literacy, yes. His ability to learn how to read and write. Literacy, that was the foundation for Frederick Douglass to do the things he did, preparing to get to that point to where he was able to escape. And Anna, my great-great-grandmother, knew at the point where he was in Baltimore, Maryland, and he was working, and he was doing all the things and they were a couple. And she knew that this, you heard strike when the iron's hot, because you never knew when Frederick Douglass might end up being, or Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey might end up going back to across the bay to the Eastern Shore to a plantation environment and would never have that opportunity to escape again. And with that opportunity, he escaped, and Anna followed him. And as they say from there, pretty much the rest is history. Because there's a whole lot more history about Frederick Douglass going forward. But again, as a descendant, It's not just the legacy of, it's not just the story of Frederick Douglass, it's the legacy of Frederick Douglass, and I am part of that legacy. So I am also the great-grandson of Charles, Frederick Douglass's son Charles, who was also a USCT, and his brother Lewis. So two of my descendants were USCT soldiers. Frederick Douglass actually was a recruiter. They didn't use that name then, but he was a recruiter for USCTs during the Civil War. His son, Frederick Jr., also assisted him in that recruiting effort. And then there was, had a daughter, Annie, that died at a young age, and then the older daughter, Rosetta. So those are the 5 family members. And then coming down the line is Charles. Once the Civil War was over, he worked with federal government, with the Grand Army, with the,
Freedmen's Bureau.
Yeah, Freedmen's Bureau. See, the people know the story too. Well, you can't always remember everything, so you look around and say, okay, who knows stuff too? Amen. So, in the Freedmen's Bureau, and so he also founded a community called Highland Beach near Annapolis, Maryland. And having purchased that property and allowing other people of means, black people of means, to be able to purchase property there. Some of them of known name lineage, and some just with means. But eventually, my grandfather, Hallie Douglass, was able to be the mayor of Highland Beach for many a year. And my grandfather, he was a graduate of Harvard University. He worked at Dunbar, he worked at Howard University for a while, and also Dunbar High School for many a year. And so, my uncle, Joseph Douglass, Fisk University grad, Harvard University, his graduate work at Harvard University, and worked he was a dean of students. He worked at Ruggles Street, USO in Boston, I believe it is. Yeah, he did a lot of outstanding things. And then there was my mother, Jean Douglass Green, born and raised in Washington, D.C., spent her summers in Highland Beach. Attended Dunbar High School with her father teaching there, eventually went to Bennett College in Morgan State, and then married my father, who was in the Army. That's how I was born in France, and eventually they ended up in California, and that's where she said as long as she was living near the water, she was fine. She didn't have to come back to the East Coast to be able to live near the coast. So Seaside she could see the ocean every day from our house on the hill. And so, that opportunity to know that much about I enjoy talking about my family just as much as I enjoy talking about Frederick Douglass. So where's the family now, and what's the legacy of Frederick Douglass? Well, of course, I am part of the legacy. I have 5 children of my own. We've homeschooled all our children up to our last one is a junior in high school right now, and they're very successful people in what they do. 2 of them have graduated college, 2 of them decided not to go to college, but they are still successful people. That's right. And so again, we raised them, I say we, because not just me and my wife, we raised them kind of the same aspect I was raised. They know what their lineage is, and they'll grow into it as they see that it's when that suit fits them, because that suit doesn't always fit people, and it can be heavy and overwhelming. And once they throw that suit away, sometimes you don't get it back. Yeah. So don't wear that suit until it's time, till it's ready to fit.
That's right.
And so now what part of the Douglass legacy is, there are really three main parts of the Douglass legacy right now, family-wise, is Kenneth Morris, Nettie Washington Douglass run the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives Organization to stop modern-day slavery, sexual trafficking, and racism. And so for those who want to be a part of something, because you're already a part of something just being here. We didn't even have to be here for you to be a part of something positive, regardless of what your nationality is. But FDFI, they're actually, for those who don't know, where did Douglass spend most of his active years outside of his enslavement? Rochester, New York. It's all right. Rochester, New York. And that's where the headquarters for Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives is currently in Rochester, New York. And Kenneth Morris is the president and leading that. And so there are ways to connect with Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives to become a part of this solution. Unable to get the information and everything right, but there are books available that you can buy. That's a special edition by Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives that you can purchase and have a special book of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. Also, on the Eastern Shore in Easton, Maryland, is Terrence Bailey, my cousin Terrence, so the Bailey family. He has an organization, and you remember the name? The Frederick Douglass on the Hill. Frederick Douglass on the Hill. And it's in its infancy stages, and so he's more community centric. He is trying to build up the community in that community there, bringing people together through the name of Frederick Douglass. And he's doing an outstanding job doing that. And so and then myself, I'm kind of like in the middle. I don't have any organizations. I'm still a full-time, my full-time job with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and full-time, father and husband. So I just enjoy going out and being a part of this legacy in the way that I can. And that's to show how my pride and how much I feel about that is one of the reasons why I am here today. So I'd like to thank everyone for this opportunity, everyone on this panel here. Much respect. Doctor, much respect to you. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergeant Green. And we have a number of panelists remaining, but they can regroup. There are two families left, and I would offer first to Browns and then subsequently Rifle Jack the opportunity to present together, if that's your sensibility.
My name is Wilhelmina Brown. Oh, let's see, I'm not familiar with it. What's on?
You're on.
Okay. Hello, my name is Wilhelmina Brown. I am a 6th generation descendant of Harley and Harriet Green, and they resided here in Peekskills. Around 2010, after I had some history given to me by an older member of our family, I decided to go on a journey to see if I could find out things about them, because as a child, I would have thought my mother was from here, because that's how proud of the Peekskills she was. And she wanted us to know that her ancestors were from Peekskills. But at the time I was beginning my journey, I didn't know that my son, Gerald, he was beginning the same journey. So usually I let him speak. I'm glad I'm not nervous right now. So I will hand the mic to him so we don't say things repetitive.
Hello, everyone. So, Peekskill alone has so much history that goes way back. And it's amazing that a lot of the history isn't shared. But over time, it's coming up. We see different interests coming about the history of Peekskills, the diversity of Peekskills. When you think about the Underground Railroad, it would not have been successful without diversity. Many different people of different nations, organizations, all participated. Hawley and Harriet, who were married, Harriet was actually a Oneida woman. So Oneida people are a maternal organization of Native Americans. And actually, even though all the properties would pretty much be in Hawley's name, and all the deeds, it's Harriet and Hawley, except for maybe one. Right? They had over 36 transactions in the city of Peekskills. And this was between 1827 all the way to 1865, if I recall properly. For people of color, that's not heard of. But they were free, and also they were born free for what we know. When we think about the Fugitive Act of 1850, they were abolitionists, and if you know about abolitionists, they were different from anti-slavers. Anti-slavery, those were the people who talked a lot, and they may put money up. The abolitionists were doing the work, and they would lose everything according to the Fugitive Act of 1850. It was a sacrifice. Hawley owned his own business. He owned a barbershop. He was right here on Division Street. Their first home at 1112 Main Street, the house still stands today. It's right out here. It's the yellow house to the left, and you will see the Sands house in the front, but the original house is in the back. And the two properties on each side were also owned by Hawley Green and Harriet. It was sold later and divided into 3 different parts. But they had properties all around, and what was significant was the barbershop that was on Division Street was not in the front of Division Street. Right where Harriet's, where the statue is standing right now, there was a drugstore on the corner. The Browns owned most of those properties, and there was an alley, and you had to go in the back through the alley in order to get to the barbershop, which was actually in the basement. And McGregor's Creek was sitting right behind there. So early maps will show McGregor's Creek running right through the back. And if you looked at the early deed, Hawley had all access to McGregor's Creek. So if any slaves were coming up that way and stuff, and this was before the creek was covered, the barbershop was right there. That might have been one of the first stops throughout, because the abolitionist movement was very strong here in Peekskills. So, and they were also part of that. So you want to add?
To our knowledge, before our ancestors came to Peekskills, Hawley and his brother, he had a brother who lived here as well, his name was Goodman Green. And they came from the Dismal Swamps. And for myself, that made me look up more information to learn what is the Dismal Swamps, where is it? I knew they were from Virginia, but I did not know the relationship of the Dismal Swamps with escaped slaves. And it was a hiding place, and people didn't dare go in there. They're still doing excavations of that area. It's between North Carolina and Virginia. So to our knowledge, that is where Harley and his brother Goodman came from, but we have to investigate more to find more on that.
So if we think about the sacrifices that were made, and even with the Fugitive Slave Act, anyone who participated could lose everything. You could be sued by slave owners and stuff, because the law was pretty specific that you were not allowed to help anybody escape from anywhere and stuff if they were slaves. So they continued to keep doing what they were doing to help people to find freedom. And the whole area, if we think about the history that's here, there were a lot of abolitionists right here in Peekskill alone. So the efforts and even the properties that they own the property at the mouth of McGregor Creek, right where it meets the Hudson. So that could have been a first stop or a way of saying, hey, this is the way you go. We also had family members that worked for the railroad at the time, which was right there on in the Hudson and the creek. We found out that there were also ships that was always docked, and many of the slaves that were running may have came by ship. We don't know if they came by train, but it's a possibility. And of course, those who walked everywhere they had to go. So.
Well, as I was sitting here, I was thinking about Holly. I know when I first found out, I literally cried because I never imagined finding out a history of any of my ancestors, because when I was in school, you heard no history of anybody of color. And so, as I said, my mom spoke of our family in a proud way, but I had no knowledge of all the things that they had done. And so I first wrote to the library here in the Peekskills. The research librarian, she called me one day and said she was so happy to give me information on my ancestors. And then she started with their names, because I had some names, because we had an older cousin. He used to come up here all the time. His name was Roland Furman. And he knew some of our history because my mother's great-grandmother, who her name was Mary Louisa Butler, she was Harley's oldest daughter. So he knew of some of the history. He wrote it down for me, and I've heard many say about their ancestors being in the colored troops. Well, we too, and he resided right here in Peekskills, George Butler and his brother Albert, they were members of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, and they are from the Peekskills. They lived right here, and later they moved south and then ended up in New Jersey, where I'm from. It's so many things going through my mind. I'm sorry. I'll give it to Gerald. Yeah.
So for Hawley himself, Hawley and Harriet, they had two sons that were also served in the colored troops. Jacob Green was in the Navy. He was assigned to the USS Vanderbilt. And also William Gibson Green. All right. He was actually in the 11th Heavy Artillery, which later became, I believe it was the 19th. Right, and then there was another number. The reason it kept changing was because in the heavy artillery, once your patrols got wiped out, you joined another one to form a new one. And he survived it, though, and he was able to return home. Actually, to our knowledge, everyone returned home. So, also, Goodman, his brother, he had William Green. He was also in the colored troops. I don't recall. All right. So, being abolitionists, this was the reaction men who went and joined the military to fight for the freedom for everybody. Because it wasn't just about one person. When we think about the Emancipation Proclamation, one of the things people forget is that when it was written about the slaves in the South to be free. It did not mention Delaware, which still had slavery at the time. And it wasn't until 2 years after that, and that's the reason why Juneteenth is so important, is when it was actually put into place. During the Emancipation Proclamation being written, it was written for the South, but the South didn't recognize that president. The South didn't recognize the Union. So when we think about being emancipated, the people themselves emancipated themselves at the time. When they left, when they were leaving, when the war was occurring, when soldiers were telling them, to go north, they were contraband, and many of those contraband end up helping out the Union soldiers. They cooked for them, they cleaned for them. So the story is that when we think about the people, they released themselves. And so before the Emancipation Proclamation actually went into effect. It's just something to think about.
One of the other things, in the 1800s, most women did not own property. So it was very rare to see someone like Harriet with her name being solely on a deed. But our ancestor, that happened right here in Peekskill. One of the things that we learned also, we have copies of these deeds, which, I'm glad because we have something to show if no one believes it. And they are on the files here in Westchester County because they are the ones who gave us the copies and all. And if we think back, this is even prior to the Civil War. These were people of color owning land and properties here. But it seems as the purpose was in order to help others get freed from the South and go north to become safe houses. Basically, from what we learned from the deeds, he bought and sold basic to other abolitionists. So they kept it in a circle, so it was being handed from one to the other and all. And he sold the property at 1112 Main Street to Mr. Sands. I know some in the community didn't think that a black man owned that house, but he did.
So because he owned the house and property and he had a job, that means he was able to vote in the state of New York. So he was worth more than $250. But also, Garrett Smith,
Yes.
all right, he contributed a lot of land to people in Adirondacks, and because they owned land and they were worth something, they also were able to vote. George Butler was also able to vote because he was one of those people who received that land. Riley Peterson was another name of a person who received property for that land, and there were a number of others.
In fact, the names of the others is Riley Peterson, Horace Holden, George Butler, and Goodman Green, and they were all from the same family. Now, why they were picked, we have no idea except to say that Jerry Smith must have known of their activities with the underground, and it also gave them the right to vote. Harley, my mother reminds me of him because as a child, my mom would go out house to house and register people to vote. And I never understood, why she was that way. But after learning about Harley and them, I said, it must be in our DNA. And I said it that way because right here, it's in one of the old newspapers here. There was a new person moved into the community. Harley was taking blacks to vote and showing them how to vote. But the newspaper article criticized him as being a person of no knowledge of knowing any of this. But about 2 weeks later, he recanted that statement because from the people in the community here, they let him know he knew exactly what he was doing. And I'm gonna let it go, but I also just wanted to mention another person from your community. He's also an ancestor of ours. In fact, he's Harley and Harriet's grandson. His name was George Grant Williams. And we found out he was the second publisher of the Philadelphia Tribune. I don't know if everybody is familiar with it, but it's one of the oldest black newspapers today in this country. You can subscribe to them and all, but Mr. Perry asked him to take over the newspaper when he got sick. And we had no knowledge that our ancestors had anything. And he too, during the early 1900s, he wrote articles about the migration of Southerners from the South to Philadelphia. He wrote about the rights of having black policemen. He was a civil rights person prior to even Martin Luther King. So we have many who were doing that type of work prior to the civil rights that we know of. Okay.
He was also associated with Booker T. Washington. He actually spoke with Booker T. Washington at different events. And he was also an entertainer.
Yes.
So he managed a lot of people.
Marian Anderson, he actually was her manager in her early days. And he brought entertainment for black people to Philadelphia. I can't think of the school right now, but it's a music school that still exists, and he was one of the founders. But it was so that black people in Philly could also have such entertainment. And she wrote of him in a couple of her books. And he, you know, he was low key, but he was one of her managers.
Okay. This is fascinating. And I also think of the expression 6 degrees of separation because I was born in Philadelphia. And I didn't leave Philly until I went to grad school. And whenever we have these kind of gatherings, people come from many different places, but it seems the more we talk, the more there's a convergence, you know? And you begin to find out you lived in the same places, sometimes at the same time, but you know, you start to hear the different family names, and then some of them have to be your family names too. And then you wonder where the link is. So when we talk about this, we talk about the building and development of a people. That's what all these ancestors and descendants were involved in, you know? So we talk about African American community today. It's a community that didn't emerge topsy-turvy. It's one that our ancestors built. And when we know it, it has tremendous positive impact on how we feel. Because for so long, most of us knew none of this. None. When everybody else had a textbook, when they talked about their history, not only were you not there, they told you didn't have any history. They told you that you were emancipated by white people. You made no contribution to your own emancipation. So when you find this out, you get kind of arrogant in a way. You might think we're getting uppity. You know what I mean? You know? All that's happened is that we begin to act like human beings who know who they are and the value of everything that's associated with them. So it's very beautiful to hear this. And with that, I'd like to offer, and you gotta tell me, Rifle Jack. I haven't heard the Rifle Jack story yet.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon.
This is Ellie Mosher.
Yes. It's fascinating sitting here and hearing all the stories. My family came from Honduras, and I was born in Belize. And of course, I ended up in Peekskill because I married David Mosier, who's the son of Charles Mosier, who was a descendant of Althea Peterson, who was his grandmother. David and I have a daughter, and we have 4 grandchildren from that union. And marrying to his family, his mother was a history buff. This was her life. And every day you hear the same story over and over again, or a new story. She knew dates, she can tell you events, she traveled all over. She was a fascinating woman, and there's more to John Jacob and Rifle Jack, and JB and I has talked about it, and I'm gonna let him tell the story because he's also a history buff, and he knows a lot more than I know. I mean, I know a lot, but he knows more. Thank you.
I guess this is from my education background. Stand up and shake your hand because we've been here a little while. Get up and move around. Just 2 minutes, 1 minute. All right, shake around because your butt gets tired in the chair. All right. As my sister-in-law Ellie mentioned, we are the outlaws of the Mosier family, actually in-laws. She married my brother-in-law David, and I had the fortune, the great opportunity to marry Judith Mosier, who is sitting back here with the beautiful gray hair. Put your hand up, you're beautiful. Still. And in that union, I guess Judy and I married in '72. I met my mother-in-law because I rented an apartment from her on Howard Street. You can almost see her house from here. But Mom was and I call her Mom because she basically adopted me. Her husband and she became my parents. My mother passed just before Judy and I got married at a very early age. And I was very dependent upon Mom as I was teaching at Oakside. She taught me a lot about the area. And we learned, and I learned, through carrying her all over Westchester to celebrate Black history. She had a little pamphlet, an association of Black history in Westchester County. There were several people. They had a good little organization that went on in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, I'm getting back to Rifle Jack Peterson. A lot of people don't know the story. Rifle Jack said, according to my records and my information, he was born in New Jersey, and he was probably a mixed race. He was a Kitchewan Indian, which is this local area here, and also a Black. Now, he lived by the old Dutch church on Route 9A, coming up out of Tarrytown, probably where Sleepy Hollow is and so forth. And he's buried in Bethel Cemetery just before you get into Osney. So he was raised by the Sherwood family. And the Sherwood family evidently were somewhat prominent because the son of the Sherwoods became a lieutenant in the Revolutionary War. And at that time, John Jacob Peterson, Rifle Jack, joined the 3rd Regiment under Sherwood. I guess they lived together. We don't know if Peterson, whether or not he was a slave or not. We don't know that. But we know that he lived with the Sherwood family. As a result of his military service, he fought in Saratoga, He fought in Monmouth, New Jersey, and got the moniker of Rifle Jack Peterson because he was a really good shot. He was able to be recognized under Pierre Van Cortlandt, who had all of this area, the Van Cortlandt Manor. And so Rifle Jack was basically worked with the military for 3 years, and when he came out and was discharged, he was working with one of his Sherwoods on a farm at Tellers Point, which is down at the Croton train station. There was an orchard there, and they had a cider press, and it was in the fall of September of 1780. So they were working at the cider press, and all of a sudden, they came in, they saw a big British ship out there crossing the Hudson River. Then they saw a boarding party coming in, and there were two boats. One was loaded with British soldiers, and the other one was a gunboat with a small cannon on the front. So Rifle Jack, being the marksman that he was, decided they hid in the bushes, they got the rifles, and they shot at the boarding party that was coming to land. They hit someone on the party who disturbed the boat. They turned around and went back to the Vulture. Now, the Vulture had on it at that time Major Andre. So Major Andre was in cahoots with Benedict Arnold, who was the commandant of West Point at the time. Benedict Arnold was going to sell the plans from West Point to the British. And if that had taken place, it might be speaking a different dialect at this point. But what happened was, when Rifle Jack fired on the Vulture, they figured out, well, we can get a cannon out there. They're shooting back at us. They fired back at them. They went up to Verplanck. Now, they were in Croton. They went to 4 miles up to Verplanck and got a cannon from Major Livingston, and they took the cannon back down with a group of other guys and set up a spot from which they could shoot that cannon at the Vulture. They fired the cannon, the Vulture fired back. They had a 2-hour battle, and all of us, the captain on the boat got hit by a splinter from the cannon that Rifle Jack had brought down, and he said, we're out of here. So they drifted back down shore. They left Andre across in Haverstraw. He couldn't get across here. So they had someone row him over at night, and he had the plans of West Point in his boot. He got caught in Ellensburg sneaking through Westchester County back down to New York City, which was occupied by the British. And long story short, if it wasn't for Rifle Jack Peterson firing on that ship, we would have been a different country today, because he stopped the British from turning over the plans for West Point. There's a lot of other parts of this story, but Rifle Jack was born in 1741. Now, the connection with the Mosiers is that his daughter married, and there's actually 2 times that Mosier men married Peterson women. I don't know if they were cousins or what, but the Rifle Jack was 57 years old when his youngest daughter was born, who married Harrison Mosier, who is in turn my father-in-law's great-great-grandfather. So there's a direct connection with that. And as a result of that direct connection, my mother-in-law persisted on finding out the story. And she and Dad was a very modest man, quiet, but Mom was a firebrand. She wanted to know. She studied all genealogy. She went to Washington, D.C., to the Smithsonian, to the Daughters of the American Revolution, and really found out that this was a true story. It just wasn't family legend. And I have a lot of documents here. Peekskill and the Revolution, he's mentioned in there from 1944. There's also mentioned that a doctor in 1880-something wanted to put a monument up for Rifle Jack Peterson in the area. We have Peekskill's African American history. You should buy a copy of this from the museum, even though I'm attributed to it, but I'm in there. Black minority in New York. This is a very interesting pamphlet that came out during the bicentennial. And it talks about how the African Americans came to and were in early New York. One of the last ones I have is My Recollections of the African American Peekskill Families by Ethel Jackson. Mrs. Jackson, from memory, I think at 93, 94, wrote this book. And John Kieran, who's at the Peekskill Museum, was very instrumental in helping her get it through it. And it tells a lot about the Greens, about the soldiers, and so on and so forth, that fought in the Civil War, but it also enumerates the families and so forth. Now, Jacob Peterson had 11 children. His wife was 15 years younger than him. I don't know about any age difference. But anyway, he left Croton, came to Peekskill, and he worked around Peekskill for a while, and it was through manual labor. And he really wasn't recognized much for his efforts in the war. He was 90 years old when he applied for his revolutionary pension. 90. And he died at 103, but he did receive his pension. He did receive his pension. It may have been $10 a month at that time, but that's a lot of money then. That's right. There is a lot of African American history in Peekskill, Westchester County. When I retired as the school principal, I'm not going to take a long time, but I retired as the school principal in 2003. And as a result of working with my mom, mother-in-law, I went to Phillipsburg Manor. She was there for a meeting, and I was listening at Phillipsburg Manor in Tarrytown, which was a plantation run by the Phillips, but it was operated by 23 enslaved Africans. And it was solely operated by 23 enslaved Africans here in Tarrytown. So I got intrigued by that. And after the meeting she had, I went up to the director and says, I'm retiring, could I volunteer on your board or something? And it turned out I became a slave. I worked as a slave in slave costumes. I learned how to make wooden buckets, and I portrayed the slave for a number of years after that, doing a lot of schools, colonial fairs and programs all over the county, New Jersey and upstate. And it turns out there's slavery in New York. New York was the second highest importer of slaves. There was Charleston, South Carolina, and New York. There are slaves here in Peekskill. I think Dr. Drake, who lived on Washington Street, in that little house where they have the yarn place, it used to be a yarn place next to the gas station. He was a doctor there, and he had a slave. And he actually had, in his records, he treated the slaves at Van Cortlandt Manor, right there in Croton. So we have a lot of history here in Peekskill. Matter of fact, the Mosers are on a map that enumerates Thomas Mosher, Cullard, Tudor, and Taylor living down there right where the Peekskill Motor Inn is now. Right there on the corner of Main Street. That was from 1880. So my wife's family goes back to Peekskill from the very beginning. They've been members of St. Peter's Church since the old church was out there in the cemetery, going out Hillside Cemetery, which was built in 1767. There were Mosers there. So we go back for a long time as a family in Peekskill. Like I say, my name's Taylor, and we're in-laws, but we have something to do with the family.
You want to mention the cannon at the museum?
Yes, the cannon that was fired by Jacob Peterson. There's not a replica, but one that was found at Fort Independence in Verplanck that could have been the same cannon, but it was the same type. And that was given to the Peekskill Museum in 1952. My mother-in-law, Kay Mosher, went through the expense of having that cannon restored and placed a granite plaque on it outlining Jacob Peterson's efforts in the Revolutionary War. And, you know, as you were saying, the family goes on as military individuals. My father-in-law was in the Red Ball Express during World War II, and he helped liberate the Jewish from the concentration camps in Auschwitz. They were black drivers who went through and knocked the gates down. Nobody says anything about that, but they went in. And they were the first ones in to liberate Auschwitz. My father was a Buffalo soldier. He rode horses in cavalry, but he also did was a mule skinner during the 92nd Infantry, going all the way through Italy fighting, and received 5 Bronze Stars for bravery. So we go way back.
And today, the Mosher's legacy lives on, because with all of this carry on with my mother-in-law and her history and finding out she was such an amazing woman. Yeah. And I think she was before her time. Yeah. With all of that, she bought up most of Howard Street. Oh. And the reason why she bought these houses, my father-in-law and the only purpose was because back then there weren't good housing for people of color. And she was also an interior decorator, and she fixed these houses so nicely and they did so much work, manual labor on these houses. And that was one of her purpose. And not only that, she was also the secretary for the NAACP of Westchester also at 18. So she was really what's the word?
Firebrand.
Yeah, she was. And she did it all in the name of making sure that people of color was recognized and had somewhere and a place that they can call home. Because, like she said before, in fact, one of the properties that she bought is an empty lot. And that lot was in fact, Howard Street was basically, she told me, Jewish families. And one by one they moved out. And there was a Jewish factory there, and I think they made, did they make stockings? I think they made stockings or something like that. She worked there, and she didn't like the way that they treated the blacks. And she vowed one day that she would buy that lot, and she would knock it down, and it's down today. That was the Mosers.
Yeah, so she is our role model. And if it wasn't for her persistence, we wouldn't know about Rifle Jack Peterson. And she keeps the legacy going, kept the legacy going. We probably have, between our immediate children and other members of the Mosier family, probably 15, 20 in the area and across the country. But our real goal is to keep it going and let them know, not only do we have the cannon at the Peekskill Museum, but there has been an exhibition of her and Dad's life in connection with the Petersons and Rifle Jack done, and it was done in the Paramount Theater some time ago. We also had the Greens there at that same time.
Yeah.
And
It was
yeah, it was a lot of us that was a part of that. So we do appreciate the diversity of Peekskill, the Peekskill history, and I really think that and I think there's something in the line about getting the museum somewhere. Yeah. Dedicated to the black families in Peekskill. So thank you for your listening to me. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, so we thank you, and we got a lot that we could possibly tell, but at this point, we appreciate your efforts, Dr. Sales and all of those who put this program together to give us the opportunity to talk about what happened to the blacks here in Peekskill. Thank you.
We like to offer the audience the opportunity to ask questions or get clarifications or even make short statements. Our time is limited, but we do have some little time left set aside for that. But before we do that, I'd certainly like to thank all of our participants, Ms. Ernestine Martin Wyatt, Kevin Douglas Green, Wilhelmina Green Brown and her son Joanna Brown, Mrs. Ellie Mosher, and Mr. James Taylor. Are there any questions at this point from the audience?
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was just incredible. My name is Margaret Steele. I'm a Peekskill artist. I live on Division Street. I'm a magician and a magic historian, and I have a book coming out 2 weeks from tonight here in Peekskill, and it's about forgotten African American magicians. And one of them has over 300 living descendants. And I want to ask a question about something Mr. Green mentioned about putting on the coat, he said. These are all people that knew their ancestor very well. They knew of him. They knew the story, but it was never out in public because the mainstream press never published information about entertainers from the past. And all of a sudden, the descendants who are thrilled and are been very helpful in putting this book together are being thrust in the spotlight. And I'm just wondering if you have any information, observations for them about what it's like to be a descendant of a famous person and how you represent that person.
I knew you mentioned my name, but I didn't, based on what I said. Again, kind of the comparison I use is my cousin Kenneth Morris. Their family actually is Mother Nettie Washington Douglas. They're descendants of both Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. So his legacy is doubled. And myself, we were both raised in California for the majority of our lives. And so we were raised away from the mystique of being in the areas of where our famous ancestors were from. So that gave us more, and thank you very much, of being able to be raised as ourselves. And so, as we both mentioned, it wasn't until we figured out how do we present our legacy in a way that it benefits others. Not just the fact that you're able to see and talk to me as a descendant, which I have to understand that how important and privileged it is for other people to be with me. It just doesn't resonate in my mind the same way. But I appreciate and I honor my legacy that people come to see me because I am a descendant of Frederick Douglass. But also, like I mentioned, it's so much more important for me to having been raised as Kevin Green and being able to find myself and then being able to, and I, you know, even though I was raised as, you know, I'm descendant of Frederick Douglass, I still had to learn more about my other descendants, even though there's documentation where compared to some other families, there might not, you know, the deep dive is gonna have to be harder and more intent than what I have to go through to find out about, you know, my immediate descendants. But, you know, it's just, at a certain point, it was for me, okay, if I'm gonna come out, you know, not come out, but if I'm gonna be a Douglass in public, I just, it's not just so you can say, look at me and say, oh, he's a great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass. I had to bring something beneficial to the table. And the same thing with my cousin Kenneth, if that light bulb went off for him also is when he decided to create the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative and go global. This is a global stance of fighting modern day slavery and sexual trafficking and racism around the world. So it just depends on where you've got to figure out where you fit in the puzzle and how much exposure you want and how much exposure you want to bring to your descendant. It's all up to the individual from my perspective.
Is it okay? Oh, okay. A little bit of what he's saying, you know, I've heard other descendants say the same thing. Michelle Duster, who is the great-granddaughter of Ida B. Wells, you know, what she's struggling with now is she wants to not just be recognized for what Ida did, but she's a writer, and she wants to be recognized for what she's doing as well. For me, it's a little bit different. I've always known about Aunt Harriet, you know, because my grandmother had a relationship with her, and my mother, and that our line is from Auburn, New York. So it was always that Aunt Harriet was just a person in our family and a relative that did something wonderful. So we never looked at it in that way. And a matter of fact, as a child, just one time, someone said about, they were talking about Harriet Tubman in our school. I think I was in second grade. I was in second grade. And so I said, oh, well, I decided, that's my ancestor. So another student said, well, if that's your ancestor, then my ancestor is the President of the United States. So I decided at that time, I'm not gonna say another thing about it. I zipped my lip. And when I said it to my sisters as an adult, they said, oh, that happened to you too? I said, yeah. And so they said they felt the same way. But for me, in, I guess 2000, in around 2003, I guess somewhere around there, or between 2003 and 6, I went through a health challenge of my own. And so and at the same time, they were building the Underground Railroad Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center in Cambridge, Maryland. So they asked for descendant interviews and also if we wanted to work on building the center, which I said, yeah, I did. But what it was is that the more I started, I went back and reread the book that Sarah Bradford had already written, 3 copies, 3 printings rather, with all a little bit different each time. I had the first printing. The last printing I didn't like because she was catering that book then to the Southern white women. And so she started, saying things in a certain kind of way that I didn't like. But I made a connection with her, with Aunt Harriet. That's when she began to be more than just a relative that did something great. She began to be very personal to me. That's when I fell in love with her because what she was going to be able to see her faith, and it leapt off the page at me during a time when I needed that. And I made that connection with her. And so that's where I'm, where you're talking about, you have to, and he was talking about looking at things and where you fit. God has a purpose for all of us, but we have to ask him, what is that purpose? But it became very evident what my purpose was because that connection just kept going around and around and around. And there is something that is so spectacular about that she is being blown up the way she is during this time. Her life is an inspiration. And she is the antithesis of all this hate that you see going around. So what I do is I've taken the mantle. There are other family members that are doing all different things, but for me, I've taken the mantle of promoting her life to keep her before the forefront. And I want her to get what she does, her due, and she's starting to do that. But also the $20 bill. Yes, what happened? I want to see her name on that, her face on that. Well, what it is now, and I thought that former President Trump was just being a racist when he said, oh, well, you won't see that on 2028, as if I'm not going to let it happen. Because of what former President Obama and Secretary Lew said, that it was going to come out. The design was done, all of that. But in fact, the design wasn't done. And they have to do certain things for security reasons. Because if you go to Canada and look at the money that they have, I think it's a $5 currency. It's beautiful. They have on their currency something on their braille for the blind. Well, see, the Blind Association, I don't know the name of it, they sued. And that is one of the reasons why we don't see anything yet. They have to do something about that. You have to be able to make the money available for all people to be able to know what it is. So when that's done, the security things are done. It's supposed to come out in 2028. That's what they're saying, no later than that. What I want to see is nothing no matter who's in office, no matter what party's in office. They can't kick it down the road anymore. They have to go on and they have to put her name, because the people have spoken. And we said, we want her. So put her on the money. She deserves to be on the money. She was a true American Democratic patriot. She fought. She was the unknown and forgotten soldier. But see, she needs to be on there. Take Andrew Jackson off. She's the antithesis of Andrew Jackson. He was a slave holder. She was a liberator. But she could have been taken back at any time. And if they had taken her back during that time, they would have tortured her first, then killed her. Because, you know, you're interrupting our livelihood here. So I'm saying all of that is that I want to promote her as an individual. And no matter how far I might go, I know that God has given me that purpose to show, connect her legacy, and her faith. So.
My name is Brandon. I'm a young African American man. I'm mixed too. One of my questions, I actually have two questions here. As a young African American, do you have any quotes for us, as young African Americans out there? And this is a question for all of y'all. Quotes or any advice for us.
What I would say to you, because I am mixed as well, besides my mother's family being of mixed ancestry, which the Petersons, the Moshers, the Greens, and so many of us are, but we're not aware of it sometimes. What I would say to you, be proud of who you are, and let no one, and I mean no one, make you feel different, because you are someone like anyone else, and you are just as important. And also continue to pursue the search of your ancestors, because they do bring pride to us. So don't let anyone ever make you feel less, okay?
Yeah, I have one from my mother-in-law. Now, you know, she was short in stature, but a beautiful woman, and her presence was important to her. She told me once that when I walked into a room, I want people to regard me. They don't have to respect me, but they have to see me. And that was the way she operated, and I do too. You have to regard me. I appreciate your respect. But if you don't respect me, I want you to look at me and say who I am. Just like if someone said that they looked into her eyes and they knew who she was. So that's a quote from Kay Mosher. You have to regard me, not necessarily respect me.
I have one thing to add to that. And this is coming from when we were in segregation. I'm from the North, and my mother was from the North. My mother was from Auburn. My father was from Virginia. But when we go south, it was different. We had to go through back doors. We had to go to like the faucets. We had to, we had colored or white. And when we would go back and forth, we had to leave late in the morning, but like maybe around 2 a.m. in the morning. And that is so that we wouldn't get messed with. My father and my mother wouldn't get messed with by somebody trying to just do, hate. And, you know, there's so many things and so many different, but the point is, how our parents taught us is just like what he said, be proud of who you are. Our parents taught us, yes, this is what you're gonna face when you leave this house. But they are no better than you are. You're just as good. And you know who you are. So you take pride in that and knowing that it's not what somebody says about you, what they think, that determines who you are. You determine who you are. So, and I'll say one more thing. You know, I know everybody has different beliefs, but God says who you are. So if you believe who you are by what he says, then that's going to keep adding to what you feel about who you are. So I would take that to the bank.
We're going to have you have the last word. Thanks, Bill. I'm Chuck Lesnick. I'm also on the Peekskill bid. I learned a lot about things from this panel. You did a great job. Thank you very much. I happen to be the guy who bought the vacant lot that Ellie mentioned from David Mosher, and bought a few lots around it, including the two houses over there. We have a 57-unit housing proposal right now before the planning board with some commercial. I'd like to know how I can honor Rifleman Jack and the Mosher family at that project, and I want to hear about the museum that you have planned.
I would suggest that from James Street to Broad Street be named the Mosher something, whatever. But some recognition of what they've done. Very much like the Greens, they were entrepreneurs and so forth, and were very instrumental in establishing quality homes for African American and the disadvantaged. So I would say something in that block has to be recognized as Mosher. It could be Mosher Place, it could be under Howard Street, but some recognition, and particularly 1126. We have a picture of Mom and Dad out there, I guess in 1945, working together. And they always did. That was an example of how you can create and do. Yes. We also have a picture of Mom when she was about 10 or 11 years old with the dedication of the Peekskill Armory when FDR was the governor of New York. And she's standing and looking at his speech. She's looking over his shoulder. But that's the way she was from 10 years old on up, and a very strong person. So I would think that that empty lot, you know, I tore 2 houses down on that empty lot. Mom made you work. You had to work when you were around her in her presence. But 2 old log houses went down there. So I would put their name on that some way.
Will do.
There's actually 2 more questions. I thought we were done, but I want to give everybody the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, and thank you all so much. My name is Maria Dautruche, and I am currently serving as the external advisor to the New York State Commission on African American History within our Department of State. And there are several things we're looking at, one of which I'll ask because the families are here. So much of our African American history across the country, but specifically here in New York State, is sitting in people's attics and basements and in church halls and at the Y and at other community spaces where diligent volunteers and family members are just trying to collect and preserve. And it would be interesting to hear if you have any ideas for what was helpful for you in preserving that history, and specifically recommendations for what the state can do to support families, communities, organizations in preserving, archiving, and amplifying these important stories and their legacy.
Okay, I had mentioned before that Mom and local artists got together and created this whole event and display of the Mosier and Peterson family. That display is in storage right now. I believe the artists would like to have some compensation for that. I mean, there's pictures and so on and so forth, and documentation about the family. If the state could pay for it through their arts and buy it, donate it to Peekskill City for their museum, it would be well preserved. Right now it's in storage in Yorktown. I would like to have it, but I don't have no room for storage. So if the state could buy it and set it up so that it can be viewed and rotated throughout the state, that would be a boon to the family.
One other way that you should be able to do it is if you form like task force and of people that will go out and collect oral histories, make it a project. Because a lot of times during collecting those oral histories, you'd be surprised how many people really don't know about what they have or anything like that. So and that's when that knowledge comes out, when you start collecting those oral histories and what is important and what isn't important.
Let me close by thanking the BID for their continuing support for an African American initiative in Peekskill. To thank Sisters in Support under the leadership of Sister LaFern Joseph for another exceptional program on the African American experience. And let me close by recommending that everybody who hasn't done it yet needs to do two things. Go down to the corner of Park Street and Division and see the Harriet Tubman statue before it leaves, and also to walk back up to, I guess, the best positions were South Street, right, with South Division, and look north, up in the air, to the top of Fern's building, the Fern Tree, and to see that beautiful mural that the BID also helped to support, which will become a very important and permanent fixture in the Peekskill landscape. Thank you all for your attention, and good afternoon. Have a good weekend.